The next morning, Thomas, the bellboy, brought me the Herald and a bit of news. The church next door had been sold. I thanked heaven for it. Not that, being a Catholic, I had any repugnance for the congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by a blatant exhorter, whose every word echoed through the aisles of the church as if it had been in my own rooms, and who insisted on his R's with a nasal persistence which revolted my very instinct. Then, too, was there a fiend in human shape, an organist, who reeled off some of the grand old hymns with an impertinence of his own, and I longed for the blood of a creature who could play the deoxy with an adamant of minor chords which one only hears in a quartet of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but when he bellowed, "And the Lord says unto Moses, the Lord is the man of war, the Lord is his name. My wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword," I wondered how many centuries of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin. Who bought this property?" I asked Thomas. "Well, nobody that I know, sir. They do say that the gent what owns it, this Hamilton Flats, was looking at it. It might be building more studios." I walked to the window. A young man with the unhealthy face stood by the churchyard gate, and the mere sight of him, with the same overwhelming repugnance, took possession of me. "By the way, Thomas," I said, "who is that fellow down there?" Thomas sniffed. "That worm, sir? That's the night watchman of the church, sir. It makes me tired sitting out all night on the step, looking at you insulting like. I'd punch his it, sir." "Beg pardon, sir." "Go on, Thomas." "One night, coming home with Ari, the other English boy, I sees 'em sitting there on the steps. We had Molly and Jin with us, sir, the two girls at the tray service, and he looked so insulting at us. I up and says, 'Oh, what you looking at, you fat slug?' 'Beg your pardon, sir, but that's how I sees it, sir.' 'Then don't say nothing,' and I says, 'Come out and I'll punch that puddin'head.' Then I opens the gate and goes in, but he don't say nothing, only looks insulting like. Then I swung on him, but it's cold and mushy. It's sicking you to touch him." "What did he do then?" I asked curiously. "Nothing." "And you, Thomas?" The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasily. "Oh, Mr. Scott, sir, I ain't no coward, and I can make it out an alley while I run. I was in the 5th Lawrence, sir. A burglar at Tellekatech was shot by the wells." "And you don't mean to say you ran away?" "Well, yes, sir. I ran." "Why?" "Oh, that's just what I wanted to know, sir. I grabbed Molly and ran, and the rest was as frightened as I." "But what were they frightened at?" Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused by the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had not only modified Thomas's Cockney dialect, but had given him the American's fear of ridicule. You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir?" "Yes, I will." "You will laugh at me, sir." "Nonsense." He hesitated. "Well, sir, it's God's truth that when it grabbed me wrist, sir, and when I twisted its soft, mushy fist, one of its fingers come off me, and..." The other loathing and horror of Thomas's face must have reflected in my own, for he added, "It's awful. And now, when I see just go away, it makes me ill." When Thomas had gone, I went to the window. The man stood behind the church railing with both hands on the gate, but I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw that the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared and vanished behind the screen with a merry, "Good morning, Mr. Scott." She had reappeared and taken her pose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas, much to her delight. She remained silent as long as I was on the drawing, but as soon as the scrape of the charcoal ceased and I took up my fixative, she began to chatter. "Oh, I've had such a lovely time last night. We went to Tony Pastor's." "Who are we?" I demanded. "Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCorknick. We call her Pinky because she's got that beautiful red hair you artists like so much. And Lizzie Burke." I sent a shower of spray from the fixative over to the canvas and said, "Well, go on." "We saw Kelly and Bobby Barnes, the skirt dancer, and all the rest. I made a mash." "Then you have gone back on me, Tessie." She laughed and shook her head. "He's Liz Burke's brother, Ed. He's a perfect gentleman." I felt constrained to give her some parental advice concerning mashing, which she took with a bright smile. "Oh, I can take care of a strain's mash," she said, examining her chewing gum. "But Ed is different. Lizzie is my best friend." Then she related how Ed had come back from the stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown up, and what an accomplished young man he was, and how he thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as a clerk into the woolen department of Macy's. Before she finished, I began to paint. She resumed the pose, smiling and chattering like a sparrow, and by noon I had studied fairly well, rubbed in, and Tessie came back to look at it. "Well, that's better," she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spread her lunch on the dining room table, opposite to me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle, and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very much attached to Tessie. I had watched her shoot up into a slender but exquisitely formed woman from a frail and awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years. Among all my models, she was my favorite. It would have troubled me very much indeed had she become tough or fly, as the phrase goes, but I never noticed any deterioration of her manner, and felt a heart that she would be all right. She and I never discussed morals at all, and I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had none myself, and partly because I knew she would do what she liked in spite of me. Still, I did hope that she would steer clear of complications, because I wished her well. And then, also, I had a selfish desire to retain the best model I had. I knew that mashing, as she termed it, had no significance with girls like Tessie, and that such things in America did not resemble the least same things in Paris. Yet, having lived with my eyes open, I also knew that somebody would take Tessie away someday, in one manner or another, and though I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense, I sincerely hoped that, in this case, there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am a Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I signed myself, I feel that everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lived as much alone as I do must confess to somebody. Well, then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tessie, which is very different. Tessie also was Catholic, and much more devout than I. So, taking it all in all, I had very little to fear for my pretty model until she should fall in love. But then I knew that fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me, and throw into her path nothing but Ed Burkes and Jimmy McCormicks. Bless her sweet face. Tessie sat below, rings of smoke up to the ceiling and tickling the ice in her tumbler. "Do you know that I also had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," she laughed. "Exactly. A dream similar to yours, only much worse. It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. I had fallen asleep about 10 o'clock, I continued, and after a while I dreamt that I was awake. So plainly did I hear the midnight bells, the wind of the tree branches, and the whistle of steamers at the bay. Even now I can scarcely believe that I was not awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had glass covering it. Dimly I saw the street lamps as I passed, for I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie in a cushioned wagon which jolted over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move, but the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my breast so that I could not raise them to help myself. I listened and then tried to call. My voice was gone. I could hear the trample of the horses attached to the wagon and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke onto my ears like the rising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head just a little, and I found that I could look not only through the glass cover of my box, but also through the glass panes in the side that covered the vehicle. I saw houses, empty and silent, neither light nor life about any of them except one. In that house, a window was open on the first floor, and a figure, all in white, stood looking down onto the streets. It was you. Tessie had turned her face away from me and leaned on the table with her elbow. I could see your face, I resumed, and it seemed to me to be very sorrowful. And then we passed on and turned into a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped. I waited and waited, closing my eyes with fear and impatience, but all was silent as the grave. After what seemed to be hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. The sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. And then I saw the white face of the hearse driver looking at me through the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me. She was trembling like a leaf. I saw that I had made an ass of myself and attempted to repair the damage. "Why, Tess," I said, "I only told you this to show you what influence your story might have had on another person's dreams. I don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you? What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream, and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman of the church, simply set my brain working as soon as I fell asleep?" She laid her head between her arms and sobbed, as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I had made of myself! But I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm about her. "Tessie, dear, forgive me," I said. "I had no business to frighten you with such nonsense. You're too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams." Her hand tightened on mine, and I felt her head fall back upon my shoulder, but she still trembled, and I petted her and comforted her. "Come, Tess, open your eyes and smile." Her eyes opened with a slow and lagged movement and met mine, but their expression was so queer that I hastened to reassure her again. "It's all humbug, Tessie. You surely are not afraid that any harm will come to you because of that?" "No," she said, but her scarlet lips quivered. "Then what's the matter? Are you afraid?" "Yes, but not for myself." "For me, then?" I demanded gaily. "For you," she murmured in a voice almost inaudible. I care for you." At first I started to laugh, but when I misunderstood her, a shock passed through me, and I sat like one tuned to stone. This was the crowning bit of idiocy that I had commended. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confession. I could pass it by with a laugh. I could misunderstand her and assure her to my health. I could simply point out that it was impossible that she could love me. But my reply was quicker than my thoughts, and I might think that now, when it was too late, for I had kissed her on the mouth. That evening, I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no back out now, and I had stared into the future, straight into the face. I was not good, not even scrupulous, but I had no idea of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The passion of my life lay burned into the sunlit forests of Brittany, but it was buried forever. Hope cried, "No!" For 3 years I had listened to the voices of hope, and for 3 years I had waited for footsteps on my threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? "No!" cried Hope. I said that I was no good. That is true, but still, I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I had led an easygoing, reckless life, taking what invited me of pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. In one thing alone, except for my painting, was I serious? And that was something which lay hidden, if not lost in Bertrand forests. It was too late for me to regret what had occurred during the day. Whatever it had been, pity, that sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instinct of gratified vanity, it was all the same now. Unless I wished to bruise an innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength, the depth of passion, of a love which I had never even suspected with all my imagined experience in the world, left me to no alternative but to respond or send her away. Whether because I am so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was I had little but gloomy Puritan in me, I did not know. But I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for the thoughtless kiss, and in fact had no time to do so before the gates of our heart opened and the flood poured forth. Others, who habitually did their duty to find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy, might have withstood it. I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her that she might have better loved Ed Burke and worn a plain gold ring, but she would not hear of it. And I thought perhaps, as long as she had decided to love somebody who she could not marry, it had better be me. I, at least, could treat her with an intelligent affection, and whenever she became tired of her infatuation, she could go none the worse for it. For I decided, an unscrupulous man that as I was, and I dreamed of the future, but never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I should not have bothered my head about scruples, for it did not occur to me to sacrifice Tessie as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked the future squarely in the face and saw the several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing or become so unhappy that I would have to either marry her or go away. If I married her, we would be unhappy. I with a wife unsuited me, and she with a husband unsuitable for any woman. For my past life could scarcely entitle me to marry. Or she might recklessly or deliberately go and do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, then her whole life would be before her with beautiful vistas of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem Flats and heaven knows what. As I strolled along through the trees by the Washington Arch, I decided that she should find a substantial friend in me anyway, and the future could make of it of itself. Then I went into the house and put on my evening dress, for the little faintly perfumed note on my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11." And the note was signed Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theater. I took supper that night, or rather, we took supper. Miss Carmichael and I at Sorali's, and the dawn was just beginning to gild the cross of the Memorial Church as I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at the Bunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed along the trees and took the walk which led me to the Gallery statue, to the Hamilton apartment house. But as I passed the courtyard, I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of the white, puffy face, and I hastened to pass. He said something which might have been addressed to me, or might have merely been a mutter to himself, but a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant, I felt like wheeling about and smashing my stick over his head, but I walked on, and entering the Hamilton, went to my apartment. For some time, I tossed about the bed trying to get some sound of his voice out of my ears, but I could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, like thick, oily smoke from a fat, windering vat, or an odor of noisome decay. And as I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ear seemed more distinct, and I began to understand the words that he muttered. It came to me slowly, as if I had forgotten them. At last I could make sense out of the sounds. It was this. Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? I was furious. What did he mean by that? Then, with a curse upon him and his, I rolled over and went to sleep. But when I awoke later, I looked pale and haggard, for I had dreamt the dream of the night before, and it troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down into my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but as I came in, she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again, and then sat down before the diesel. "Hello, where's the study that I began yesterday?" I asked. Tessie looked conscious but did not answer. I began to hunt among the piles of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." And when I gave up the search among the other canvases and turned to look around the room for the missing study, I noticed Tessie standing by the screen with her clothes still on. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Then hurry." "Do you want me to pose as I have always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas! We had eaten of the tree of knowledge, and Eden was naive of innocence, were dreams of the past. For her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "I will pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen where I will put it." "No," I said. "We will begin something new." And I went into my wardrobe and picked up a maroonish costume, which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume, and Tessie retired to the screen with it, enchanted. When she came forth again, I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoise, and the ends curled about her a glittering girdle. Her feet were encased in the embroidered pointed slippers of the skirt of her costume, curiously wrought with arabesque and silver, felled her ankles. The deep metallic blue vest embroidered with silver, and the short jacket spangled and sewn with turquoise became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held up her face, smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket and drawing out a gold chain with the cross attached, and I dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine?" she flattered. "Yours. Now go and pose." Then, with a radiant smile, she ran behind the screen and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. "I had intended to give it to you when I went home tonight," she said, "but I can't wait now." I opened the box. On the pink cotton inside lay a clasp of black onyx, on which was inlaid a curious symbol, or a letter in gold, and neither was Arabic or Chinese, nor I found afterwards did it belong to any human script. "It's all I had to give you for a keepsake," she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it, and I promised to wear it always. She fashioned it onto my coat beneath the label. "How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing as this," I said. "I did not buy it," she laughed. "Well, where did she get it?" Then she told me how she had found it one day, coming up to the aquarium by the Battery, how she had advised it and watched the papers, but at last gave up all hopes to finding the owner. "That was last winter," she said, "the very day I had the first horrid dream about the hearse." I remembered my dream of the previous night, but said nothing. And presently, with my charcoal was flying over a new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand.